So the meeting of the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on People with Disabilities is now starting to be recorded, and this is the November 18th meeting. And Chair Rogers, I'm handing it back over to you.
So, and are you sure the recording is on? Because I usually get an announcement that the meeting is now being recorded, and I didn't hear that.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. All right. Sorry. Thank you for everybody again for being here. I very much appreciate you giving up your time to participate. We haven't had anybody else join, right?
No.
Okay, so we're going to go right into our presentations. So from Performance and Innovation, is it Gina? Are you presenting first?
Yes, Ken.
Okay.
I am giving kind of a follow-up presentation from the last time I was here with you all. Was that September now, I believe? On those recommendations from the 911 MPD work group for alternative responses to police for mental health calls and non-emergency reporting calls.
Okay, take it away.
All right, I will go ahead and share my screen here.
Gina, before you start, Nancy, can you just quickly check with Harvey? Harvey, are you still able to see Nancy?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect.
And you know what? One other thing, because we're using Teams, right?
We are using Teams, correct.
So you can also turn on closed captions on your screen, Nick. And I believe at the end of the meeting, you have an option of saving those closed captions as a transcript. And as I understand it, it used to be that automatic closed captioning like this was really bad, but Microsoft has really stepped up their game. And as I understand, the automated captioning has gotten way, way better. It's not perfect, but it gives you at least an option to have a transcript at the end of the meeting, if that's helpful.
Yes, I am trying to find my option to turn on captions. It was there before.
I hear everybody talking about there's a ellipsis, 3 dots somewhere that you click on that turns captioning on.
Yes, and that's where I've seen it and used it a few times, but for some reason it is not listed today. But I will figure that out on the side and give the platform back to Gina.
Okay. We're all getting adept at being flexible, right? Okay, Gina, go ahead. Do we still have Gina?
Gina?
Oh, sorry about that. All right. So can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I will start here with this first slide going over some of the, just remind you about some of the key findings that we had from the survey we put out in April. And we were just wanting to get residents' experiences with mental health crisis issues and reporting non-emergency crimes such as theft, property damage, or parking issues. And so some of the main things that we found during that survey are that for both surveys, many people are uncomfortable calling 911 or interacting with police, and yet that is the most common route that they take when reporting those incidents and requesting service um, to help them with their issue. We also learned that the things that folks value most are really surrounded around customer service. Is they want to be treated respectfully, empathetically, and feel like their issue matters to the person that they are asking um, to give them a service. Also, folks really want to have a choice in who is responding and what that response looks like. And a lot of respondents mentioned um, wanting to protect either their self or their BIPAC neighbors or community. So not wanting to call 911 for fear that police may respond even if they're not wanted, and then that could escalate and result in harm to one of their neighbors or themselves. And then similar to that, these are some takeaways and conclusions we found um, during the survey, and things that we really wanted to keep in mind for our recommendations, and know that these are some of the things that we need to build into the responses that we hope to develop. And a lot of that similarly is that a lot of people do not call the city when either themselves or someone they know are experiencing a mental health crisis for fear of that police response. A lot of folks are either experiencing themselves or it's a close friend or family member. So that's something that we were able to apply to those responses that you'll see later, is that wanting to address it from a holistic perspective, so involving community in that in that response as well. And again, being treated with respect, feeling safe, and ensuring that that responder is going to arrive quickly to be able to provide support for the person in crisis. And then for those non-emergency incidents, again, folks not really wanting to interact with police for those issues because they feel they're either a waste of resources because the issue has already happened in terms of property damage or theft, and they really just need to submit a report to file an insurance claim. And we also learned that we have some more education to do from a city perspective for residents, so that they know all of the things that they're able to report to 311. Because we saw that a lot of folks are reporting parking issues to 311, but did not know that they could call them for theft or property damage rather than 911. So this next slide here is a summary of the mental health recommendations. And again, we were trying to take a holistic approach, and that was really stressed within community participation, is that just the response may not be enough. It'll be far more effective if we're able to address it at the different stages of a call. So the first recommendation you see here involves when someone calls the city to report the crisis. So we want to offer mental health training for community members, using some of the folks who have been doing the work in community already, who have those connections. And so that would be like a micro grant program where we put community leaders through like a train the trainer program, and then they are able to go recruit in their unique communities, and then train folks in things like mental health first aid, or a training that's called QPR, which stands for question, persuade, refer. And that's similar to CPR. When someone is having is not able to breathe, you're able to intervene before first responders get there. So with this one, it's the ability to recognize when someone is having like suicidal ideation and try to intervene and get them some support that they need. Increase the likelihood that they can get through that crisis. The second set of recommendations here are when the city actually gets the call. And so that's then training 911 call takers and dispatchers in mental health, and or embedding a mental health professional in 911 to help with some of that triage and try to ensure that folks get the right response for their issue. And then that leads directly into the actual service that the city then would provide, or a combination of partners, um, potentially the county or private providers, which would consist of mobile crisis teams, um, one mental health provider and one EMT who would respond to those mental health related calls without a weapon, because that was something that was stressed a lot in the surveys, wanting an unarmed response, and with a van full of supplies so that they're able to address the immediate issue on the spot. And that would be for those calls that do not involve particularly a firearm and are not posing like immediate threats to others or themselves. This next slide here is a summary of our reporting recommendations. So addressing those property damage, theft, and parking concerns. And some of these were able to go straight towards implementation because we already have some infrastructure built up for them. And then some others are recommended to go to pilot because we need to still learn some things and test some ideas out. So as far as implementation goes, the 911 MPD work group last year recommended that theft report only calls go straight to 311 and not to 911 and do not receive a police response. So that is currently being implemented. So this recommendation here is to add property damage calls and parking concerns. The next one is to build a comprehensive online reporting system. In the surveys, we found that residents, if they're able to report it in a way that's accessible to them and that's convenient, that is their preference, rather than having an in-person response all the time, especially if that in-person response is police. And what we know about our system is that we have the police reporting, or the police website, and the 311 website, and it can be kind of confusing for folks to figure out the right place to report their issue. And so we want to combine those into one user-friendly system, so we take out the work for residents to have to figure out where to go, and really are able to route that on the back end to get folks to the right place. And then the third one in this implement category is an awareness campaign for residents. So if we're going to be changing the options, either adding options or taking some away, we want to let residents know that. So previously they may have been used to calling 911 if they had a theft happen. And now we need that to go to 311. So we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to be aware of their different reporting options and the changes that we might be making. And then the ones over here for pilot are to train non-police city staff to take those theft and property damage reports and to collect evidence if an in-person response is needed. Excuse me. And that was really to provide that similar level of service, because in some instances, an in-person response will be needed, whether that's because folks are not comfortable or unfamiliar with the online reporting system, or there is evidence that needs to be collected at the scene. And so we do want to be able to offer that in some form. Also recognizing that folks said that they don't necessarily need a sworn officer to do that, or someone who is armed, because that can also escalate those situations. And then the final one recommended for pilot is to transfer parking problem calls to traffic control. So right now, traffic control responds to parking issues when they're open, but they're only open until 6 p.m. And so after that time, until they come back on shift in the morning, police respond to those calls. So this would be expanding that response, that traffic control response, to eliminate an officer response. And that was really the abridged version of those recommendations. So I am available for questions or to give any more clarity to any of those.
So Gina, this is Ken. Before we go into questions from committee members, I have I don't remember if this was in the, I don't think this was covered in the first part, and it's not covered in this part either. But there, there was something I experienced several years ago, probably 5 years ago by now, maybe even longer, who knows? Time flies when you're having fun, right? But I experienced a situation that, to me, it was an emergency. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't parking. It wasn't a theft. It wasn't mental health at that point. So what happened is I'm blind, home alone, and I have a basement. I was doing laundry in my utility room, and I put a load of wash in. And as I closed the laundry door, as I was leaving, there was an explosion in the laundry room. And I opened the door because I could hear water right away splashing. So I opened the door just a little bit, and I was greeted with very, very hot water that was splattering all in the room and steam. And so I shut the door very quickly. It was scalding hot water, right? So something happened with one of the pipes, hot water pipes, and water was billowing in my room. I'm home alone. It was winter. There was snow outside. I can't run next door. I don't know where the next door is, right? Um, and I didn't know what to do. I was panicking because in that same room that was filling up with water, as I could see it or feel it coming out from under the door, um, there's a water heater, there's a gas water heater, there's other electrical in that room, and all I could hear is water spewing, and I knew it was hot water. There is a water valve, but it's way on the other side of that room that I couldn't get to without fear of burning myself. And I ran around like a chicken without a head. I didn't know what to do. So I finally called 911, and the operator said, "You need to call a plumber." And I'm like, I need some help. What do I do? And I engaged the operator for quite a while, and they eventually sent the fire department, and somebody came and was able to go into the room. And by then the hot water was exhausted, which I didn't realize, but the basement was filling with water. So, I mean, it was continuing pretty profusely, and they were able to shut the water valve off, and the water eventually went away, and I was left with a mess. But for non-emergency, well, I mean, those are emergency situations, but they don't necessarily involve the police. Or is there any plan for something like that? And at that time, 311 wasn't open. It was late at night. I don't see anything like that. Was any situation brought up to that type of an account?
Thank you for telling me about that experience, Ken. That sounds really scary. To be, period. It sounds scary to have hot water coming out, and yeah. So to answer your question, no, that type of situation was not something that came up. The work group really only focused on just those few types of call categories.
Sure.
And there are other things that are happening right now as it relates to public safety and the types of calls that police respond to, or just the types of calls that come into 911 in general. There's a problem nature code study that is about to begin pretty soon, where they're going to look at all the different types of call categories that come into 911 and see what those are, see if they need reclassification in terms of what priority code is assigned to them and the type of response they receive. And that should help kind of give some insight to see what are we responding to, what issues are residents having, and do we need to think differently about how we're responding. So to answer your question about these particular recommendations, no, nothing like that is covered. It's really just mental health, um, theft, property damage, and parking.
Okay.
But there is potential for, a broader degree of calls to be evaluated in the coming month or years.
Okay.
And I say years just because I'm not sure how long all this stuff is going to take.
Sure.
This is
And
Nick. Mandy has her hand
Yep.
hand up.
I saw that. Go ahead, Mandy.
Hi, this is Mandy Temple. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So recently, at one of my neighborhood association meetings, we had Commissioner Fernando come in and talk about what Hennepin County is trying to do regarding 911 and different response types, trying to figure out how that could be potentially standardized with the task force to ensure wherever you're calling from, you're going to get what you expect coming to visit your house, as opposed to someone just routing police to the nature of the request. I read your summary, and while I was listening, I thought one of the things that 311 does is it can tag if this is a disability related call or request. Often there's also tags for if a minor is involved. And I'm wondering if that's something that can be tagged or flagged for data collection when doing these case projects to figure out how many of these are related to accessible path of travel or parking and snow, how much of it is related to mental health or a mental health assessment where there may be multiple disabilities or, again, minors involved. So hopefully that made sense. I don't think it needs to necessarily be a separate response category because the same groups are really going to still be going out to address those issues, but it's determining, do they have the training to communicate with the audience that is expected? And how can you collect that information during that 911 process and tag it to let someone know that there may be someone with a communication or mobility-based disability or hidden disability or a minor present?
Thank you. Is it Mandy or Amanda?
I go by both.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mandy, for that question. Right now, to the best of my understanding, so 911 can take in the details that the caller gives, but I do not believe that there are tags that they can put in that can be searched for later, and that is something that we plan to look in, that the Problem Nature Code study plans to look into while it's evaluating the call categories and the capabilities of the call system that we currently have. And yes, that is a super useful feature that I know 311 has and can help, especially with COVID, something that they were able to use effectively to see how many of the calls they were getting were related to COVID. So I've taken a note here. So I plan to share that with my team. And as we get more, right now we're waiting to hear which of the recommendations council is going to want us to move forward with. So should it be some that this may be relevant to, then I have that note here that I can pass along.
So this is Mandy again, just real quick. The second item to that is specifically making sure that that information gets out to whomever is being dispatched. So it's not just enough to track it, it's making sure that that's the type of information that gets into the hands of the people who are going to be on site, so that they understand that there are people with disabilities, minors, different types of disabilities involved. Again, communication, mobility, and invisible disability.
Yes, thank you for that. And I 100% agree that, and that's part of us wanting to focus not just on sending out a different response, but wanting to look at the 911 level, because we know that they need, high quality information to then be able to pass that along to dispatch or to the responders. But they have to be able to pick out what is relevant. And like you said, those things are super relevant to the nature of who responds and, the the crisis that they're responding to.
Okay,
Mr.
Xavier
Chair?
has his hand up.
Oh.
Did Evan have a question? Or?
I've got Evan next, but Xavier, you have a question?
Yes. Gina, there's a to be able to use as a text message to dial 911. This is Javier Arana, and I'm deaf. So just wonder, and I think we do have that now to use the text system.
What's the question? If you can report your crisis or incident to 911 using text messaging?
Yes, like as in if someone's deaf or doesn't use the telephone.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I believe the city currently has that function now. I don't have really extensive knowledge about that, so I could certainly look into it and then pass that information to Nick if there's a further like a more detailed that.
Yeah, because like if you call by voice, it automatically goes to detect where you are, but using the text, will that work as well?
So with text, it doesn't automatically detect your location?
I think he's asking, does it detect location when you use text?
Okay, yes, that I do not know, but I can ask that and then pass that information to Nick to send to you all.
One other thing I think that's really important to piggyback off of these questions that members are asking is, so in terms of communicating or contacting 911 with an alternative way, such as texting, as someone who cannot use the telephone needs to do, when there's education that goes out to residents, citizens about service changes with 911, that information about focusing on alternative methods of communication should be included. I think that would be our recommendation from the committee, that those should be shared anytime there's new information going out about 911, just to reiterate that that population is included.
Thank you, Ken. I think that's an excellent point.
And Evan?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Gina, Evan here. I'm wondering when there is an alternative response from a mental health professional and an EMT, a little bit more about that response, and specifically, I guess I'm wondering, did they respond in an ambulance? Do they respond in another vehicle with sirens and lights? Or what does that look like? And I ask because I know that, for folks experiencing a mental health crisis, or perhaps for some folks with sensory disabilities, that just that experience of, the intensity of the lights or the sirens can in itself be traumatizing and kind of create a escalation. So curious as to what that response, in practice is like.
Thank you, Evan. I think that's a great question. Our plan for this pilot is to have them responding in bands, and folks definitely prefer a discrete response. And so eliminating those lights and sirens to have it be, again, much more discreet and make folks more comfortable and prevent any potential escalation that could come from that piece of the response specifically. And that van would then have supplies that the EMT could use, so it wouldn't be as extensive as an ambulance, but it would have some degree of medical supplies, a laptop where they may be able to access records in case it's someone who has had this type of issue before, and they can, you know, see what those notes are, and also provide a kind of private location in case they're in a place where it's difficult to have a discussion because it may be loud or not warm, but they could step inside that van and then have a discussion there.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, this is Harvey speaking right now. And when talking about 911 and texting, I've used that mobile phone, and I did call 911, and it was this was about, just 1 second here. I got no response at all when I tried doing that from 911 at all. So if I was bleeding and I couldn't text, I would only press 911. That's all. And if something would be said, that's all. And I couldn't do anything. So I have on my phone, they should be able to identify where I am with my cell phone, but there's been no response. I mean, I'll try again in a few minutes, but I tried about 3 minutes ago, just to see if it would work. And so I'll try again soon and I will let you know. But for me, 911 by text did not work. Okay, and maybe my reception is not all the best here, but I did just try it.
Thank you for that information, Harvey. That is a major flaw if that is, you know, if they're not responding to those texts. And again, I apologize, I do not have a ton of information about the texting feature, but certainly as our team is like doing the evaluations for the pilots, that we can highlight that there may be some other areas within the 911 system that could use that evaluation as well.
Before I get to Xavier, this is Ken. So doesn't the 911 text have a different unique number?
I am not sure.
Harvey, I don't know.
I would just think if you're using a mobile phone, it's a regular mobile phone, and you're dialing 911, it's just gonna process it like a regular call.
This is Nick. So obviously there's quite a few questions around 911 and its texting capabilities, and I feel that we do not have the answers for that. But it does bring up, to Gina's point, a inherent, I guess, interest in making sure that those loops are kind of closed as they are proceeding with this pilot, because obviously if we are finding that that we're not able to answer those particular questions, that we might be creating additional barriers or issues for other folks in times of need and response. So not trying to rush us along, but I feel that if there are more questions around 911, I'd be happy to take that in an email format and follow up that way.
Okay, and we have Xavier and then Harvey. So Xavier.
Okay. You know, the 911 call center, like it used to have, like in Hopkins or in Edina, they all have their own 911 center. And now they simply got the budget cut. Now they go all in one 911 local center somewhere in Hennepin. Is that correct? And how that works?
Yeah, so my understanding, Minneapolis has our 911 system, and then the suburbs have the Hennepin County 911 call center. So yes, to the best of my understanding, they know they no longer, I wasn't aware that they used to have their own individual ones. I know that now they do all go through Hennepin County Center though.
Okay, Harvey?
How would that work? How would they know if it's coming from, say, Hopkins, not from in Minneapolis somewhere?
I don't have all of the details about how their system works, but so I'm not sure what the GPS system and how that all works. So that's something that I'm not able to speak to.
So Nick, it sounds like we have lots of questions about 911. Is there a possibility we could get a 911
Yes,
presentation?
I feel that is the natural
Yeah.
progression of this conversation, because we don't have those answers.
And just so everybody understands, Gina is from a different department that's doing a study about 911. So she's not the 911 expert about what the service provides and all those details. So I just want everybody to understand that. So I have Harvey and then Amanda.
Okay, so I just tried to call 911 again by texting, and the same result. There was no response. So I stopped calling, and I'm now focusing on the meeting. Thank you, but just let you know that happened.
All right, thank you, Harvey. Amanda?
Thank you for that in real time user test, Harvey. That's certainly good information for us to have, because there's so many, different pieces that we need to consider as we're going to this and going through this. And so if we can improve some other elements of the response process that aren't specifically related to the pilots, that would be great too. So I wrote those notes down, and I'll bring them up as our team is moving through the work.
So this is Mandy again. Two quick things. One, for the notation of the minutes, I have put in the comment section the state of Minnesota's 911 FAQ on how they're processing text to 911 calls for our discussion later. I think for the purposes of this pilot, I would ask from this group to determine if text to 911 could be included in the pilot, what special considerations or reasonable accommodations, adaptations need to be done to be able to collect and compare that data as part of the pilot. And when you are educating individuals on this program, to ensure that you can include that text to 911 feature, assuming it's validated and functional, as part of your education campaign and process. So I think that summarizes basically everything that we've talked about related to the pilot.
Amanda, if you have that typed up, could you either put it in the chat or send it to Nick for him to forward to me?
Please, via email.
Okay.
And this is Ken. I also just looked up how to text 911, and the information that's provided on what came up was that for texting 911, you need to open a text message on your mobile phone, and in the to field, input 911. And then in the body of the message, you need to put what you need: fire, ambulance, police, and the location, and then send it. That's what I'm coming across on my Google search. So it's not just a matter of calling 911. You have to text, as in you're creating a brand new text message. So it's not as expeditious. And I don't know how you would manage that if you were in the middle of an emergency. But that's what I'm finding as the process on the internet.
Well,
yep. Who was that?
This Donna.
Okay.
I do have a comment on that. When I was in the terrible fire in '75, the phones were burned out. And that would be a case where you would want to be able to use something like that, because what I ended up doing is just taking a boot, smashing a window, and jumping out, and had a cop come up and draw a gun on me because it was dark and it was all that smashing glass. So it would have been much safer had I been able to do it with a cell phone.
Yeah. Okay, and any last questions? We need to move on, so I'll entertain one more question. Okay, hearing none. Gina, thank you very much. Is there anything you need from us with these recommendations?
I remember last time that Wanya and I came to present, there was some discussion about a support letter. So if you are in support of the recommendations, and that is still something that the group is interested in, then that would be the only thing. Otherwise, I really do appreciate, taking the time for me to come and present to you all today, and also for the very thoughtful comments that you gave and letting me know where some areas where we can improve upon, with the pilots, but also just generally in our response to emergencies.
Okay. Thank you, Gina, very much. We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
So transforming public safety, community safety, I'm sorry. Nick?
Yes. Thank you, Gina, for that presentation, because it's actually a great segue into this next conversation. So I'm going to do my best to kind of give an abridged version on the history of this project, and then we will get straight into the discussion questions. Right now, I also have my colleague from NCR, our Neighborhood and Community Relations, Erica Myers, here with us as a note taker for the conversation, and I will be guiding folks through the discussion questions. So to quickly start, what we are talking about today stemmed from the unfortunate, untimely death of George Floyd earlier this summer. So what happened after that was the city council adopted a resolution with Mayor Fry as well, in terms of committing to a year-long transforming community safety engagement process. So what that really means is taking the year to gather community input, review research, and conduct new research and data, and exploring new opportunities and changes and policies to our community system, along with our public safety system as well. So in this process, it's broken up into 4 phases. So we are currently in phase 1, which is just an initial, I don't want to say fact gathering or information gathering process, but it's going to be closely related to that, where there is a larger survey issued. But we do know that a lot of folks typically prefer not to do surveys, and then a lot of good information comes from these conversations. So NCR is assisting the health department, or the Office of Violence and Prevention, who is the spearheads of this particular project, in gathering a lot of the community input through these different conversations. And in this process, as I mentioned, we're in phase 1. Phase 2 starts next year, and that's coming back to folks in terms of what we gathered through the conversations. And then moving into phase 3 and 4 is when it solidifies into proposed strategies and policies for our city council to review. So in the process, it's really reviewing, reviewing 3 different areas. The first, is alternatives to policing and policing response. The next phase, next area is public health oriented violence prevention. And the next is policy reforms that will shift police culture and community relations with the police as well. So with that said, we are, like I said, we're in phase 1, which goes until the end of this year. And we are going to multiple community groups and organizations and boards and commissions as well, with a set of questions, and kind of just to have a conversation. And I sent that out as well. And I'm happy to share my screen here with the questions. and just having a conversation in terms around what folks feel community safety should be, what's an appropriate model, the different responses from 911 and MPD, and that's where Gina's office is very instrumental and helpful in doing a lot of that groundwork already. And then that information will be taken and evaluated, and we will come back to everyone in terms of the data points moving into proposed strategies next year. Trying to share this window. Okay, so in doing this, I'm not going to be able to see everyone, but I will do my best to pay attention and there we go. And I'll vocalize the questions as well. So hopefully this is visible. So before we start, does anyone have any questions around what we're discussing or this current project or initiative? Great. Erica, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. So the first question, and I will highlight and repeat it a few different times, is what are the biggest concerns or issues you have with the existing community safety model? Again, what are your biggest concerns or issues with the existing community safety model?
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I may think I know what the current community safety model is, but I'm not certain that if we start answering this question, we're all starting from the same place. So what's a summary of that?
You know what? That is a very good point, Ken. And that's something that we also additionally recognized, especially when it came to even crafting the name or just verbalizing what this project is, because it switched from public safety and community safety. And that changes too with everyone's experiences and their perceptions. So,
Right.
and I'll come from mine just to help start this conversation. To me, public safety is a police response, right? That's your traditional, like the last conversation, call 911, and then you get a response from the police traditionally, or sometimes the EMTs or fire, for the situation you're in. I like community safety because it kind of goes beyond just a law enforcement related concept, because community safety also involves your neighbors, right? And your community either directly in that neighborhood or just your own community across the Twin Cities or just elsewhere as well. And that also gets into a health, like a public health in terms of safe parks for folks, safe streets, and then so on. So I think we left it a little nuanced because everyone has a different perception, right? And then when we come from that perception, explain what would be what we feel that is, that's how we can answer this question. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Well, it does, and I'll just jump off and I'll piggyback off of what I said earlier in my example of what I considered to be a safety issue or emergency safety issue. It was urgent, but it didn't require police. It didn't require armed services. It didn't require necessarily the fire department. There was no fire at that point. You know, there was, so, and that's kind of where I'm struggling a little bit, because I think safety response and community safety response is different from people's different perspectives. So I would think that it makes sense that there has to be a front door, right? There has to be a gatekeeper, and that's the 911 service. So they need to be expert at figuring out what needs to be dispatched. And a response of, you need to call a plumber, is not a community safety response that I would want to hear, especially when you're in this high stress situation, that there's this thing going on that needs some help and you can't deal with it. So, but I also understand, there are instances when you need a police, there's instances when you need fire, there's instances when you need an ambulance or paramedic. So I think all of those need to be considered.
And thanks, Ken. And that's a very good point. Because not only do we have different definitions around what community safety is, it's also what is that appropriate response, right? Where it may be for us, some of us it might be a police person, or some of us it might be a community service worker of So I do want to reiterate, like, there's no right or wrong answer for this question. And I think the first point that you brought up is a very good point, because, we may think we know what it is, and we can name what that is and what the concerns are around, or the answer is we don't know, which is not bad, right? I don't think that's a bad answer to say, given the current situation, it's very complex. We don't currently know what the good community safety model is, and we should refine that.
Yep. No, absolutely. This is the time, and like you said, there's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong definition of community safety, but I think there needs to be some brief introduction so that people understand that. Because when you asked the question, my first thought was, gosh, I don't know what the community safety plan is. So, that introduction can be a little bit different to broaden people's thinking. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have just kind of general thoughts. It's Evan.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that when I think about the current public community safety model, it is kind of that response to bad things happening.
Yeah.
So it's like somebody gets hurt and you call 911, or there's some other emergency, so you use emergency services. But I think where that is lacking is it's all about responding, which is of course important, but I think where this conversation is going, certainly I support this, as more towards a holistic view of safety and working to do more to create the conditions of safety that help people remain safe. So a more preventative, kind of a public health type of an approach to safety, thinking about it not just as what do you do when something bad happens, but how do you create the conditions where, I guess, bad things are less likely to happen.
Evan, if you don't mind, could I tease out a few parts of your response?
Yeah.
So in creating those conditions, right? And I want to go a little bit broad here. What would be an inappropriate response, right? We may know what that is, but I'm just curious, if you don't mind sharing, what would that response be that's not the appropriate one, and how, what are some of the attachments around that?
Yeah, I won't pretend like I have all the answers, but there are whole fields of study and professions dedicated to, like, violence prevention, for example, and strategies that work to prevent rather than respond to violence. And I know that piece of it is making sure that people have are connected to resources to meet their basic needs. So there are a lot of other factors in a person's life that, if not stable or met, will increase the likelihood that they experience violence or commit acts of violence. So things like having social workers or nurses in the community that more proactively connect people to housing resources, to early childhood education resources, to food resources, to economic resources. Those are examples of things that I think the research and people that do this for a living have found are effective to mitigating some of the conditions that create violence. But that's not how our current system is built. We don't invest in that kind of the conditions of living and improving people's quality of living. We respond to bad things that happen that arise often out of other unmet needs.
Thanks. And you don't mind, I'm going to highlight one part of that again. I think you said it very well in terms of an issue can be that we are not appropriately investing in people's conditions, right? And I think for this committee may understand it a little bit better than other folks in terms of there is investment in the, in a community of how we interact with each other, right? And then there's also the physical infrastructure of it too, because that also, I think for some folks that also makes up a safe community in general in terms of our investments into our own areas, right? So this committee has diligently fought for access for everyone, and that's beyond just making sure that our right-of-ways are accessible, but kind of making sure that everyone's included in any type of public establishment. So some folks also feel that leads to a safe community as well.
Yeah, and this is Ken. I'm gonna jump in because I think one thing that came to mind as Evan was describing, our current, I don't know if it's the model, but our current way that we handle 911 calls is one way. Doesn't matter what kind of call it is. It seems mostly if it's sensed to be a real emergency that someone's hyped up and claiming they need help, there's going to be armed police respond first, and that may not be what's needed. That may exacerbate the issue. So I think this is great generalization, right? It's a very broad stroke, but I think we generally have a system that we funnel everything into, and we've now learned that system doesn't work very well. And we have unintended consequences. I'll call them unintended consequences, oftentimes as a result of that way of responding generally all the time. So I think the focus and trying to analyze what's really needed from the community perspective is really a good step.
Thank you. And Mandy, I do see your hand raised. And before you do that, I will also open this. I think, Ken, you naturally segue along with Evan into the second question is, and we could have the conversation on both, is what are the opportunities for change, right? Because you noted the issue that where these calls are funneling into and that response is one area that is an issue, but then that's where we could, through, like, let's say Gina's work is what the city is trying to do to respond and change that. And I'm just going to open this up where we're now going to cover just both questions 1 and 2 in terms of where, if folks still want to chime in on what the issues or concerns are, but then if they want to respond with what are opportunities for change, that's completely okay as well. So Mandy, you have the floor.
All right, so Andy, I come from this from a different perspective where I am a neighborhood block leader. I'm also on a neighborhood association and also support different mechanisms for communication and engagement with different city entities and having people navigate their community and world to keep it safe, welcome, and inclusive. I think the two main points are engagement and how we engage people through this process, and then really thinking strategically about that involvement in that communication. So I'll give examples here that move to question number 2 about opportunities for change. Currently, the city of Minneapolis has crime prevention specialists, and they're kind of arranged and have a lot of area that they have to cover to do outreach in the community. And they rely on existing community structures like neighborhood associations, small businesses, block leaders to disseminate and engage in communication. Each precinct has a PAC, a sort of advisory group. And again, you're getting those same sorts of people who have that interest, but they may not have the need or understanding or knowledge of how to engage and communicate. They're also focused on a emergency response, like a disaster response. But those on the front lines are not always answering those types of questions. It's basic questions. Who do I get in touch with to ask this question, which is normally 311 and routing them or somewhere else. It's trying to get them to connect and engage with the services preventatively, as Evan was talking about. And that leads me to that second point of communication of opportunities and needs. It's a matter of creating a neighborhood and community that values resiliency. And what I've seen some municipalities do, and some agencies at the county, state, and federal level, is they have resiliency web pages and they have resources available. But they bake in resiliency into what they do as a strategy for all their systems in their enterprise. And what I mean by that is when they think about employment, they think about building resilient teams. When they think about building construction and accessible path of travel with public works, they're thinking about how a community is going to interact and engage in those spaces and build that connection and resiliency to use those spaces in different ways in times of snow, flood, tornado, emergency, or otherwise, or even just a large group of people convening, what that emergency response or egress or safe space might be. And there's lots of different ways to apply resiliency. What I feel is missing from the concept of community safety as a plan is building in that resiliency into everything that we do. And so when we talk about strategies, we can use some of the existing systems, but if they're not trained to handle or respond in an accessible and inclusive way, if they aren't able to communicate basic information to their audience, whether it's barriers to language, communication style, or timing, that's a big factor. So I'll give an example of timing, and then I'll pause because I know other people want to have comment. The example that I'll give about timing is, imagine you have, I'll use my block as an example. I have 28 kids on my block. Yeah, you heard right. It's a little block, 28. It's amazing. And we speak multiple languages on our block. We have people who are working swing shifts, split shifts, and this was well before COVID. Lots of people working from home. We currently have construction crews on our block, and it is a main utility that is trying to communicate updates on when people need to move vehicles and when they need access to your home. In this case, it's Centerpoint updating gas lines. Well, some of that work had to be coordinated with the city. Some had to be coordinated with the the subcontractors, they're all trying to work together with neighbors, and they have a project coordinator that's going around knocking on doors, trying to get them to not knock before 8 a.m. As I mentioned, lots of people are either sleeping or getting their kids off to school, things like that. And what happened is they were having trouble communicating. They had text information, an option to sign up. They left flyers on doors. But what they didn't do is the municipality, in this case the city, wasn't communicating all the changes of the work that needed to be done with the crew. The crew was going to the neighborhood, the community, to get the latest updates and information, and the community became the middle person. And we also had a police presence because there was a concern of safety of the staff working on the construction site, about tampering with the gas lines, and about theft of equipment and materials because there are precious metals involved. But none of that information was relayed to the neighborhood about safety. It was boom, there was just a police presence dropped in, and it actually escalated concern and anxiety in the community. And we had to respond in a way to explain why they were there, how it could help, and that no, they weren't going to be going into people's homes. The example I give here is a cautionary tale where we know we have to collaborate, we know we have to communicate. We know that there's issues to get our work done in the city that may require a safety or a physical police. But if it's not communicated how and why that benefits, what the rights and responsibilities are, we're not building a resilient neighborhood to be able to understand that influx of visitors, whether they're expected or not. So I really think that if we're going to envision what a community safety plan looks like, it has to have that shared process of voices that are within the community coming together to help formalize that plan, evaluate that plan, and make suggestions. So it's not just a one-time engagement meeting, that there's an ongoing process to that. It's being engaged with on-demand resources so that you don't have just the passing privilege to access them or attend a meeting, that it's available in different languages and different sources that are fully accessible to all. So that's what I would envision of a process, design, strategy, and approach. And I'm going to end there. Thank you, guys.
That was great. Thanks, Mandy. I feel sorry for whoever has to follow up on that one. Just kidding.
I was just going to say, right on, Mandy.
Yeah, and you know, and I certainly don't want to diminish anything that you said, but it what I kept thinking about in your summary there was, in essence, it's nothing about us without us, and that doesn't just necessarily refer to people with disabilities, but whatever's being engaged, everyone needs to be in collaboration. Well said.
Does anyone else want to respond or add to either questions 1 or 2, or just?
This is Joan.
Oh, hi, Joan.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Right. I think there's not much to say after what Mandy. I mean, you kind of captured it, and you too, Kim, when you were talking about, nothing about us without us. I mean, you don't like to have something just being done to you. You want to feel like you're a part of it, and that's generally what's missing. Yeah. So did anybody get that on recorded? What Mandy just said?
We did a meeting.
Yeah. The meeting's being recorded, and there is someone taking notes. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. So, I certainly concur too with what Mandy said.
I think the one thing that I do want to highlight and uplift too is 2 things, Mandy, and you did highlight it at the beginning too, is the resiliency part. I think that is a very crucial piece of this conversation, or just this work in general, right? If you just think about for our different communities, the different trauma and history that we have, and then kind of just that ongoing history right now, And the second part is how do we build things together as well, and that engagement around it. I think that's very crucial and important. And that I think that's something that is not new, and it's been championed by this committee multiple times over. So I really do appreciate that being in the space. Go ahead, Ken.
Yep. So I've got a question for you. I know at one time, and I couldn't tell you how many years ago this was, but at one time, at one of our community neighborhood annual meetings, or I don't know what they're called, but conferences, we got a lot of information about a resiliency project that was providing a chief resiliency officer or some office of resiliency in the city. Is that still happening? Is that still in existence, or is that an old?
I believe there is a I don't know if it's a formal title, but a chief resiliency officer or chief resiliency person.
Yeah.
I believe that is still in existence. Their body of work I'm not familiar with, so I can't really comment. So I could note that and look into it for this committee. Gina mentioned there is a chief resiliency officer, correct?
Yeah, I thought I remember something about that a few years ago.
Gina,
and quite frankly, I have no idea what they do.
We could follow up on that as well. So I know folks are. I don't want to speed this up, but I'll move at a little bit of a better pace so folks can also catch Governor Walz's press conference. But the third question goes back to our previous conversation around 911 calls and an alternative response to 911 calls, because their work is on mental health related calls. Do you all, and Ken, I think you alluded to this within your story and your example, are there other types of 911 calls or community safety issues that should have a non-police response? So I think, in an emergency situation very well is, your water pipes bursting in your basement and getting close to your utility or electrical box. That feels like something that requires a response. So those type of situations, are there other situations or types of calls that would fall into that, and who should respond as well?
So it almost seems to me that in order for us to get away from this one size fits all response kind of process that we've worked ourselves into, it almost seems, and I realize 311 was developed to kind of handle some of these things, that you have a place to go to get information, to get direction, to get resources or referrals. But 311's not available 24 hours a day. So maybe that's a concept that needs to be explored. And I'm certainly, I'm not making any commentary on how well or how not well 311 deciphers calls and forwards people, but that's their primary responsibility, is to listen and figure out where the call needs to go next, and creates a record of that to be able to trace. So if we had more opportunity, and it were more of an education piece, if that could also be a reliable way of calling when you don't have necessarily a medical, fire, or police need, but you have other urgent needs. I almost feel like, we ask a lot of our 911 dispatch people, right? They need to keep people calm. They need to assess quickly. They need to figure out what's going on. They get cryptic information. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But how do we develop a system where they can have resources as well to refer somebody to? They're limited in who they can refer to.
Ken, this is Joan. Something just kind of came over me here. There is something in the city though. Say you have difficulty getting up. So you fell on the floor and now you can't get up. I mean, yeah, you can call 911, but there's another number. There is another number that you can call. So it's not, the fire trucks and the ambulance coming just to get, so-and-so up off the floor, they're not hurt, kind of thing. And I don't know what it's, yeah, there is.
Joan, is that like a community paramedic program?
I don't know. I mean,
I know some other cities.
I think it's, yeah. So look into that, Nick. I'll ask one of my sisters about that. Anyway, but yeah, I know. I know there is one. So, but I don't know what it's called or anything. So, yeah, it's for the non really life-threatening stuff.
Yeah.
But you still need help, So.
Thank you. I'll look into that. I don't want to generalize and call it a medical emergency, but it feels like it's kind of in that, it is a medical emergency, but not a medical emergency requiring fire truck sirens and EMT sirens and things like that. So I'm going to go off of the community paramedic response. So thank you, Evan, and I'll just work and inquire based off of that. Are there any other folks that wanted to give a little bit more input to question 3? If not, we can move on to question 4, which is what violence prevention? What are other violence prevention work that the city should focus on? Again, that is, what are other violence prevention work that the city should focus on? So I could give a little bit of a backstory to this just to kind of help folks get an idea into this question. Before I joined the city and before I even moved here to Minnesota, I was a case manager for a nonprofit in Portland, and my role is to really work with youth and families, and it wasn't direct violence prevention work, but it was with that in mind in terms of working with at-risk youth, primarily from Asian communities, to make sure that the given their economic or their educational situation, that they are not falling into bad habits and behavior, right? So that there's different models and there's different bodies of work at different levels of government on that, and really part of our strategies or our mantra is just making sure that we meet with them where they are, and then not only in their space but also kind of where they are in their current situation or life. And we're not there to help them get A's, but at least progress through school, as well as find out what kind of communities they want to live in and how they want to participate in that. And sometimes some folks that's different. A lot of people like to play soccer, so we did soccer camps. A lot of folks like music, so we found avenues for them to participate in school events and perform. And then some folks just like not to do anything, and that's just us walking around the park. So I feel that that's preventative work that would sway them away from other bad habits or choices. So I'm sharing that to say that this is different for different folks, and that may that may be something that you are doing, like Mandy, directly on your block with 28 kids, or is that right, 28 kids, or if you or elsewhere. So with that being said, I do, Harvey, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. Okay, I would like to kind of make a comment related to violence.
Sure.
I've had some experience with a hearing person who then was talking to me and came up to me, up to my face and starting to talk with me. I tried to explain that I can't hear. And so someone else intervened between the two of us and then tried to resolve the conflict, come to some resolution. The person who intervened did a good job, but I did not understand the reason why that other person was so angry. I didn't understand what was going on. And the two of them had a conversation and went back and forth between each other. And then they left. And I was left just like going, what happened? And so if the police were to show up in that situation, or a first responder were to show up in that situation, they would see that and it would be nice for them to intervene, but with the understanding that both sides are able to understand the situation and could just have told that person that was mad at me that there was some there was some mistake or whatever, somehow to resolve it. So I'd like to have some discussion like how to resolve that instead of this person just yelling at me ongoing and then leaving without any type of resolution of the issue. So that really was close to this person hitting me. And the face was so close to my face and they got very, very close to hitting me. So that was a violent situation. And I'm hoping the police or the first responders will understand that level of working with a deaf person as well, not just to ignore the deaf person during when this whole process is happening, like they're kind of like an animal and ignoring them, but knowing to address them as well.
Harvey, thank you for sharing that. I think Ken, if I could just share one little tidbit, and I want to highlight something that Harvey, you mentioned there in terms of that mediation and resolution, or community mediation and resolution. I think that is a great idea, and I think that's a great body of work that the city can focus on. I don't know if folks follow the different moving pieces of the city, but the health department does have an outreach team that's called the Violence Interrupters that not manages, but focuses on that level of that work in terms of working with folks in neighborhoods to disrupt violent interactions through mediation and conflict resolution. So I think that is a very crucial point that I just wanted to highlight. And Ken, yes.
Yeah, so I think those are good programs. Absolutely, no doubt about it. But I think this issue kind of goes back to what Mandy was identifying earlier is, not everybody gets to choose where they live. And so not everyone feels comfortable in, sharing laundry, sharing issues, or calling out somebody if somebody's being irresponsible. So I think it gets back to what Mandy was talking about in terms of having an open and collaborative process where neighbors know neighbors, because in order to prevent violence, you need to understand when violence is escalating or when that kind of situation is presenting itself more often. That's certainly not the only way, but that's one way. And I think we are so siloed sometimes. We don't even know our neighbors sometimes. And so really creating a community that is more responsive to each other can really help kind of move the needle in this direction, I think. And I think those other programs are very valuable and they have their place. And perhaps maybe they wouldn't be needed if we had a more inclusive environment in our blocks and people knew each other and weren't afraid to have communication and conversations with each other. I don't know that that can be mandated, but if I were king. Mandy, you have your hand up?
Yep, this is Mandy. I'll try and be shorter this time. I wanted to focus on number 4 as a violent prevention work that the city should focus on. And part of that resiliency and training piece is providing people the tools that they need to be successful in communication. Part of that is de-escalation training. Part of that is mediation training. That can be done. We can start by doing the train the trainer method with people who are volunteering to be BOC leaders or neighborhood association folks who, often deal with disputes and fielding issues. Local schools, local businesses, trusted places where people go to get answers and information. This type of training is not generally included on how to resolve conflict in general. Because most people don't even want to talk about it. So it's getting people to think about what the community impacts are. And oftentimes to get consensus for a community change, to talk about changes, we talk about what are the impacts to others. Because if you only see through your lens, your perception of what's happening is really bound by that. And so when we talk about if we want to change that action, we really need to change that perception of what's going on. I did want to also mention that I did send something to Nick and Ken about our Chief Resilience Officer, Ron Harris, and an article that he recently wrote about some strategies that go back to number 2. But I think that there's ways that we can, as a committee, talk about prevention strategies that are aimed for inclusion and engagement of people with disabilities, whether they live, work, or play. Because sometimes you may not see someone as a neighbor. You don't realize that they're coming around your neighborhood every day to work or drop off deliveries, or they're engaging in some other way. So if we start to expand what we think about as a neighbor and as a community, we're going to expand who we communicate with, how we do that, how we relate to them. And that's part of what I feel like the city could focus on, providing more of those bite-sized mini training and resources in multiple language formats, shapes, and sizes, that when you talk about de-escalation training, when you talk about diversity and inclusion training, when you talk about mediation training, that you're able to understand that with a disability-friendly lens. And I'll end there. Thanks.
And Harvey?
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't put my hand up. I don't know why it's up.
Okay. All right. Nick, how many more questions are there?
2.
Okay.
We could go through number 5. I'll read it. What policies or practices should licensed police officers have to follow once they arrive to a situation? Again, what policies or practices should licensed police officers have to follow once they arrive to a situation? A few examples is responding to a report of domestic abuse, a report of crime being committed, any report of bias in the commission of a crime as well. So I think this question or the answer, some of the solutions was kind of highlighted in other responses throughout the conversations as well, but I'll open it up for anyone that wants to respond.
This is Harvey. I'd like to respond.
Sure.
Okay.
I was thinking about how many times the police have handcuffed a deaf person. And they put the cuffs behind the back, which really for any deaf person, if they identify them themselves as deaf and they use their sign language, it's best to cuff them in the front so that they can at least still communicate, at least gesture a little bit, and, do some kind of communication while being cuffed. But behind the back just is not acceptable, and that's just an FYI.
Thank you, Harvey. We'll put that down as a notation or recommendation. Anyone else?
Thank you.
So why don't you go into the last question too, and people can answer either one.
Oh, sure. The last question is, what can the city do to rebuild or increase your trust in the city's community safety model? Again, that is, what can the city do to rebuild or increase your trust in the city's community safety model? And again, I do feel that this question was also answered in other forms of conversation throughout this time as well. But I'm happy to highlight any points someone may want to make.
Harvey here again.
Mhm.
I would love to say that I was stopped by an officer in the city. It was actually an hour south of here. And they could finger spell. So they had basic signing skills, I was so excited, like, hi, how are you kind of thing. And, that was nice. We could actually have a conversation and, I still got the ticket. Oh, I'm sorry. And I actually was able to not get the ticket out of the deal, but we could converse through finger spelling. And really, that was so helpful. So if any officers would be able to learn very basic sign language like speeding, license, ticket, and finger spelling, I think that would help so much, and that would give a lot of trust rebuild to the deaf community.
That's a great point, Harvey, and I think I feel that there's a few other great points in your story there. One is, that communication aspect, and I think we've talked about that. And the other part is just your interaction, because it felt like if I could say it this way, and you feel like we could record it, but just that human interaction, humanizing each other. I think that personal interaction also made for. So
Exactly.
I think that was yeah.
Before I call on Mandy, I just want to summarize. So I think a good way to put this, a response to that last question, is rebuilding trust as a process that starts with respecting citizens. And I think Harvey's example is a great example of that. Respecting that people have different communication styles and needs. The willingness to learn those is a good sign of respecting that difference. And those are the types of demonstrations that I think need to be exhibited before real trust can take place. It's a process. It's going to take time. Mandy?
So this is Mandy. I think the last one is really about prioritizing and demonstrating those knowledge, skills, and abilities. Sorry, I'm in my federal zone. Those knowledge, skills, and abilities to have active listening. I think so often we forget to hear what the request is. We jump to conclusions. We're jumping to solutions. We're triaging. And sometimes we need to stop and consider our audience and really take in what we're getting from the other individual. And so active listening isn't just listening with your ears. It's taking in that information in a way that you can process it back to somebody else. So whether it's collecting metrics on community safety and being able to share it with others, or listening to someone's request and understanding how to route them to the appropriate need, whether that's 311, 911, or, a community mental health support in any language. That's important to do. And the city has not built that trust to demonstrate that it can listen to the needs of the community and act on them. And so the first step is the active listening. The second step is that action. And we have a lot of people who have been working, especially in the BIPOC community, for years on these topics of citizen engagement. And they've been doing a lot of this labor, and now it's suddenly getting, visibility. And I'll give an example where our COVID Shared Process Advisory Committee that Minneapolis Department of Health they got individuals from all across the city, very diverse backgrounds, to represent different communities, engage, and provide solutions on the public health crisis of COVID as a pandemic, and later how to address with resiliency and trauma recovery with civil unrest. What they heard is necessarily new. It's that someone was there to receive it. And in this case, it was the public health commissioner who agreed to sit in on these meetings and reports and provide action items and come back to the group about what they were doing. There was that accountability and listening that translated into real action and real meaningful steps. Now, did everyone get everything that they wanted? No. But that's what builds trust, that something is getting done and it's not just lip service. So I think if we can include in our summary, which I loved what Ken said, is that we actually have to build in as part of our resiliency structure that active listening and that shared process and power, so that people in the community can get that message to the person who can actually take action. And that person who takes action can actually help disseminate that information back on what happened. That's that level of communication that I was talking about in the beginning. And without that, trust isn't going to be able to be built upon. So I'll end there.
Hitting home runs all night, huh, Mandy? Thanks. Does anyone else? Cool beans. That concludes this presentation then.
Okay, so we do have a quorum now, right?
Correct.
So the two things I'd like to do is go back to our meeting minutes. We have September and October meeting minutes to approve. So let's take September meeting minutes. Is there a motion for approval?
This is Harvey. I approve them.
Okay, Harvey's made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second, Evan.
Okay, moved and seconded that our September meeting minutes be approved. Any discussion or comments, corrections, additions, deletions? Hearing none. All those in favor? Oh, we need to do roll call, right?
Correct.
Okay, we go down the list.
Yes. Sorry, I ran out of water, so my throat's a little dry. Mandy.
This is Mandy, yes.
Ethan.
Yes, this is Ethan.
Evan.
Yes.
Harvey.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you.
Yes, this is Harvey. Yes.
Ken.
Yes.
Joan. We'll get back to Joan. Donna. let's count that number. So let me count that. I mean, it is a majority, so like I believe that counts, correct?
Yeah, is Joan still on? And Donna?
Or Donna?
Do they show up in the?
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm going to call it. Let's. The motion is approved. If anybody wants to appeal the decision of the chair, you can do that. Let's move to the October meeting minutes. Entertain a motion to pass those.
This is Mandy. I'll move the motion to approve the October minutes. Thanks for including the information.
Okay. Is there a second?
This is Ethan, second.
Thank you, Ethan. Any discussion, comments? Hearing none, let's go through the roll call.
Mandy? Ethan?
Ethan.
This is
here.
Mandy, yes.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was trying to figure out if my mic was on as well. Evan?
This is Evan, yes.
Harvey?
Yes.
Joan? Ken?
Yes.
Donna? I feel like Joan and Donna are not present at the moment, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I will approve those minutes as passed. Any other business we need to do?
No official business. I will just say, please stay safe. Obviously, everyone is probably keen on what the governor is going to say, and given our current situation, yep.
And I ditto that. Please be careful and safe and have a very happy Thanksgiving if you celebrate Thanksgiving or whatever holidays you celebrate. Be safe. All right, meeting is adjourned.
You too. Are we safe? Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, yep. All right, see